this webinar is sort of part of or a follow-up of some initiatives that as a consortium we have already started, especially with Nancy, but we also have started conversations with Roger. They both belong now to Ithaka Strategic Consulting and Research. And what's most important in the AMICAL perspective, I think, is that we have always sort of claimed that we are a diverse group of institutions with multicultural communities. And I really think that the tools, the things that they're doing for Ithaka would really help us in understanding better the nature of this community. As often happened in the past, we know that individually most of our institutions claim to be multicultural based to very, very general traits like very often citizenship. And I think it's a good task for AMICAL as a consortium to deepen the knowledge of our communities. So first of all, it could be an interesting task for the AMICAL consortium itself. Furthermore, it can be really important to increase the value of our libraries inside our institutions, because being so multicultural is actually a marketing tool for many of our institutions. And if we can demonstrate how we are multicultural, what is our diversity, our values, our value for our institution will also increase a lot. And so these are the two things for which we would like to explore the interest of the other AMICAL participants in deepening the knowledge on doing further experiences, either with Nancy and with Roger. As you know, Roger is now the program director of library users and scholarly practices. He is in charge of several surveys on the usage of the resources. There is one, he does one for faculty, one research on faculty, and another one that has just been released on libraries. And I hope that he'll have time, maybe during the discussion, to tell us a little bit of this also. And Nancy has already worked with some of us, many of us, I would say, on ethnographic methods that provide sort of in-depth knowledge of our users' needs. And so the question is what we will do next. Nancy has also recently published a book that is the second look to her activity in Rochester libraries, and it would be interesting to know what kind of second look we can do as well. And this is all what I need to say before leaving the floor to them. Welcome, and let's start.
at Ithaka S+R. So I know that all of you know JSTOR, which is a part of Ithaca. It's by far the biggest part of Ithaca, and there's another part called Portico, and then there's a research group, and that's Ithaka S+R, and that's where I'm now. So I'm continuing to do user research just as I was doing before, but now I'm doing it through Ithaka S+R, and so I have some new colleagues, and one of them is Roger, and I'm going to hand it off to Roger just for a moment now to introduce himself.
Hi everyone. I was just trying to get my configuration set up. Thank you, Elisabetta and Jeff and Nancy. I'm Roger Schonfeld. I'm Ithaka S+R's program director who focuses on libraries and in particular on their users and their attitudes and practices. And I'm thrilled to be here today and looking forward to having the chance to speak with you in just a few minutes.
Okay, so let me share with you the agenda for today. So I'm going to just sort of go back over some of the user studies that we've done together and talk about also the surveys and how these are complementary methods. And then I'm going to hand it off to Roger just to talk about surveys and give you some of the details there. Then I'll come back briefly and or actually, I think Roger is going to take this, leveraging surveys and user studies across AMICAL institutions. So things that you see and AUP were also involved, and that was the project that we presented regard to study spaces, that students were choosing their study spaces for a lot of different reasons, convenience for some, but for many of them, they were either dependent on a library space because it was really the only place that they could get some good schoolwork done. And others were choosing different spaces because of the particular um, supports that they provided, whether it's resources or technologies or what have you. So they were putting some thought into where they were going to do their work. And the people who participated in this project, the people from these four institutions, gained a better understanding of undergraduates. They said that they learned about students as individuals. They sort of got a better sense of the students as real people and learned about the complexity of their lives and got a much better sense of what their students needed on their campuses in order to do good schoolwork, which is kind of what it's all about. So the second project was again on undergraduates, but this one had much more of a focus on space needs. And this was LAU and JCU and AUN and AUCA. And this was the project that we presented at the meeting in Beirut in 2011. Actually, we made the presentation in Byblos on the last day of the conference. So the focus was on space, but we also had an interest, a continuing interest in how students do their schoolwork, and especially how they conduct their research projects and the kinds of supports they need. Oh, I see the publication from the first study is now in the chat box. Thank you. So some of the findings from that were there's a need for a stronger library faculty connection. I think that was coming out most strongly at AUCA, and people at AUCA acted on that, and I think it got some real value there. The library is an important social and academic space. So again, confirming what came out of the first project, that spaces need to have multiple functions because students have to do a lot of different kinds of work in a space. And so the one space is really not going to meet their needs, one kind of space. Sometimes they have to be quiet, sometimes they have to be able to talk. Sometimes they need to work with technology. Sometimes students really need to get away from the technology so they won't be distracted by it, because sometimes it's a support and sometimes a distraction. And one of the really, students need ongoing faculty feedback. That was a really, really interesting finding, that the students really need that faculty feedback in order to know whether they're kind of on track with their work, whether they're doing the right thing, and it's best to get that while they're doing the work rather than waiting until the very end when it may be too late for some of them. But one of the big findings from that project for the people who were on the project, the people from these 4 institutions, was they felt that students were doing remarkably well under real limitations. So I thought that there was a lot of compassion on the part of the people on the research project for the students, deeper understanding. And they also said that they felt very strongly, the people who did this project together, that we replace assumptions with data in order to identify real needs and set priorities. I think that's something I got verbatim from what somebody said. Replacing assumptions with data to identify real needs and set priorities. So then we had a third project, and this was the one that we presented at the most recent conference at John Cabot in Rome last June. So this one was a departure. This was a project on faculty members and how they do research and how they use resources. And we found that there were quite a number of differences across the institutions. I mean, all of them following the same pattern of the American style institution, teaching in English, and having an American style curriculum, but then pretty significant differences in size of student body, size of faculty, the kinds of research resources that were available to faculty, and also the scholarly literature that faculty members at different AMICAL institutions have is quite varied. So very, very interesting varieties. And that played out in the ways that faculty conducted their research, what kind of time they had to do their research, and what kind of access to resources they had, which also varied quite a bit. One thing that we found out for several of the institutions is that many faculty rely on informal relationships to get the literature that they need to use because it might not be available through their institutional library. Many AMICAL institutions, of course, have teaching libraries more than research libraries, although there's quite a lot of access to literature through databases. But it's not the same everywhere, and it's not always exactly what people need in every case. So a lot of really interesting findings coming out of these studies, and I'm going to pick up on that in a few moments and to make a connection to surveys. But first, let me just talk about some or some results from a piece of research, there's it's very compelling when you actually have the evidence. And the reason it's compelling is because everybody recognizes that you can make better decisions and better plans when you do have evidence that you've collected by doing a little research in your organization. So now I want to introduce the the complementarity of the surveys and the user studies. So all the stuff that I've done with you, we could call user studies, user research. Um, Sometimes I use the expression participatory design. So let me talk about how the user studies are complementary to what Roger is going to talk about, surveys. And I know you're all familiar with the survey in general. Roger will tell you about Ithaka surveys in particular. But in surveys, of course, you can get many, many respondents, which is quite different from user studies where you only get a few respondents. In surveys, you get mostly standardized answers because you're asking standardized questions, whereas in user studies, you get open-ended questions and these kind of free-form answers. So in surveys, you can do the analysis much more quickly with less of an investment of your time. In the user studies, you have to do a very extensive analysis. Anybody who's done one of these projects with me knows that the analysis is actually, it's more demanding than the information gathering. So in terms of what you get out of surveys and user studies, you get very broad information from surveys, but you get very deep information from user studies. So this is very complementary. In surveys, the findings are related to trends and general attitudes. And in user studies, it's very much related to the people's practices, which you can really see in their workplaces. And so you come out with comparisons of many academic practices on the survey side and comparisons of social behavior on the user study side. There is no perfect method. If there were, I'd use it, but there isn't. So you have to choose your methods. You have to figure out what method is going to work for your information needs. You figure out, well, this is what I need to know, and then you figure out, well, this is I'm going to find it out. It's always good if you have the resources to fit different methods together, because you will have more powerful results. If you have the resources, you will get better information if you use a couple of methods and not just one. So there are a couple of ways that you can combine user studies and surveys. You can start with a user study and develop some hypotheses and then test your hypotheses with a survey. Or you could administer a survey first and identify topics that you want to study in greater depth, and then do user studies. So it really works in either direction. What I did, just as an example, was I pulled out a concept that came, or a hypothesis that came out of the user studies that we did most recently at the faculty research project that we did at these 4 institutions on the slide, the most recent project. So one of the hypotheses, as I just mentioned, was that faculty members do not always have easy access to all the scholarly literature they have. So just as an example, it could be very interesting to follow up across many AMICAL institutions to see whether this holds at more than just a few of your institutions. So one example of how you could get more value out of following up user studies with a survey, and of course you can do it in the other direction. So I am now going to hand off, I'm now going to hand off to Roger, and here's the details of the surveys.
Thank you. Thanks, Nancy. I hope that Nancy's review of some of the really fascinating work that she's had a chance to do with many AMICAL members has really helped to set a good context, I think, for the work that we are doing now with our surveys. Excuse me. And I just would like to say I'm so thrilled to have a chance to talk to you all today. I feel like I've been following the work of the AMICAL community for more than a decade, since I worked at the Mellon Foundation myself, and I'm just thrilled to have a chance to meet with you and tell you a little bit about some of my work as well. So what we are the starting point for our surveys has been an effort to understand how faculty member, especially faculty member attitudes and practices are changing at a very, as Nancy mentioned, at a very broad level. And most of our work up until the last few years has resulted in the publication of a series of reports that are available for free from our website that cover, like for example, on the left, our faculty survey, which we last published in 2012, our library survey, which Elisabetta mentioned a few moments ago, which we just released actually earlier this week. And our surveys are really designed to look at, so for example, in the case of the faculty survey, are designed to take a very faculty-focused, faculty-centric approach in trying to understand information usage, research practices, teaching practices, attitudes towards the role of the library, and so forth, as broadly as we possibly can across faculty members. And we have found that it's very effective to compare those findings both across disciplines, so from one discipline or field of study to another, from different types of institutions, large research universities to smaller teaching colleges and things like that. And then as we've begun to study other populations like library directors in our survey of our library survey, which focuses on the directors and leaders of academic libraries, to compare how librarians feel about about what some of the faculty research practices are, how librarians feel about the role of the library, and so forth, and compare those with what we've learned from faculty members. One of our big initiatives this year is to launch a survey of students as well, and I'll say a little bit more about that soon, but I hope that in another 2 years from now I'll be able to show you a slide here with a third sort of very boring report cover, but one that says student survey on it as well. Let me just emphasize that in all of our survey work, we're led by advisors and committees of advisors. I thought it might be helpful just to put the overall list of advisors that have worked with us on the surveys over the last 3 or 4 years up here on a slide. Many of these are different librarians and different librarians from different types of institutions and in different types of roles. But we also have the president of a small college. Some of you possibly may know Joellen Parker, who used to lead Knightley, who's now at Sweetbriar College. There are folks from university presses and scholarly societies as well. So I really want to give you a sense that we're trying to design these surveys for the library, and so of course librarians have played a very substantial role in the development of them, but we're also trying to ensure that they're designed from the perspective of students and faculty members, and so that's why it's been so important to have other advisors, other types of advisors as well. Now I thought I might just almost just to tease you, because we don't really have time for a full presentation of all of the findings from our surveys today. I'd be happy to do that at some time if that made sense to do. But what I thought I would do is just tease you with a few slides about some of what we've learned from the faculty survey and how that's comparing with what we're hearing from the librarian survey. And I see there was a question just before I move on about the advisors. And yes, the advisors have helped us tremendously in both shaping the substantive coverage of the questionnaires for the surveys, helping us to work on exactly how the questions should be phrased and structured, and then in many cases helping us to analyze the national level findings and make sense of what they mean. So yes, the advisors have helped us throughout the process of the surveys in every case. So in terms of teasing you with a couple of findings, here I put up a strongly worded statement. This is an example of one of the types of questions that we ask typically in the survey. There's a couple of different question types, but this is one of them. It's a strongly worded statement. Electronic versions of scholarly monographs play an important role in the research and teaching of faculty members at my institution. And this is a case of a question that's very carefully designed to focus on my own institution. And let me show you what we found here. So looking at the faculty members, I can show you. Let me see if I can make this work. The faculty members here, you can see that about 50%, a little over 50%. This is of U.S. faculty members. A little over 50% of U.S. faculty members agree strongly that electronic versions of scholarly monographs are very important to the research that they conduct. And we can break that down by disciplinary differences, by different institution types, by the age of faculty members, and by other characteristics. But this is just the aggregate look at what faculty members say. 50%, a little more than 50%, agree strongly that electronic versions of scholarly monographs play an important role in their research and teaching. And this compares with what we've seen from the library survey, where you can see in the most recent cycle of the survey, the one that we just released the other day, that's with these red bars here. At the doctoral institutions, it's about a little more than a third agree strongly with the statement, and it goes down to the baccalaureate schools which are the ones that offer a bachelor's degree, but typically not a master's or doctoral degree. At the baccalaureate schools, only about 25% of the library directors who responded agree strongly with that statement. And yes, it's a big difference. And there are differences inside this bar, the faculty member bar too. So there are disciplinary differences. Some of the more quantitative fields, like the scientists, are going to be a little bit more comfortable with electronic versions of scholarly monographs, no question. But humanists, social scientists, professions, they all are, in the 40+% level of agreement with this statement among U.S. faculty members. And so that has raised some really interesting questions. Do faculty members, when they look at I'll go back to the wording of the question just so you can see it. Do faculty members, when they see this question wording here, do faculty members think about the kinds of licensed resources that librarians might be thinking of? So librarians might be, and I'm speculating here, but might think of Project Muse or eBrary or JSTOR as the sources of these electronic versions of scholarly monographs. But we know from some of our qualitative work that faculty members, historians, are likely as likely to be thinking about Google Books or perhaps or Kindle or other kinds of sources. And so maybe that explains some of those differences. Or alternatively, maybe library directors are not as well aware of how important monographs are, electronic versions of monographs are to faculty members. So a couple of different hypotheses, a couple of different explanations, but this is a great example of something that I think is a fascinating set of findings looking across respondents from the U.S. And I suspect, and I actually know from some of our local survey participants, is a really important set of findings at a given institution to understand where one's faculty members are across the board broadly, and that's something that one of the things that's been quite useful in our surveys has been helping individual institutions understand issues about the print to electronic format migration. Now here's another example. There's been a tremendous amount of interest and concern about the role of the library and how that role is changing. And library leaders tell us in our surveys that helping students develop their research skills, what sometimes might be called information literacy, or various kinds of instruction that libraries may offer, that this is a vital role of the library, growing only more important over the course of time. So we have a whole number of questions, really a whole module in our faculty survey focusing on student research skills. And so I'm just pulling this one question out. I think it's a really interesting one. It's another one of those strongly worded statements. Librarians at my college or university contribute significantly to student learning by helping them to develop their research skills. And in this case, this is the library survey, 84%, more than 8 out of 10 library directors agree strongly with that statement. Not just that librarians contribute, but that they contribute significantly to student learning in this way. Among faculty members nationally, the share is 45% agreeing strongly. So you can see a very significant disconnect between library directors' sense of the value of this role and faculty members' sense of the value of this role. With faculty members, there are tremendous disciplinary differences in terms of understanding the role of the library on things like information literacy and research skills. But there are also tremendous differences from institution to institution and institution type to institution type. So I would be misleading if I didn't say if I didn't tell you that I did cherry pick these two examples to show you some of our more striking findings. But I think you can get a sense just from these two about some of the thematic coverage that we've really been emphasizing, both collections and format issues, and also some of these information literacy and research skills and research skills issues. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't point out that although 45% is perhaps not as high as librarians would like to see, it's getting close to 50% agreeing strongly that librarians contribute in these ways. So it's not zero, and unfortunately, it's not 100 either. So with that said, let me turn to saying a little bit about the local surveys. And I'm trying not to watch too carefully the chat, but Jeff, your comment just had me laugh there. So as we've done the local surveys, we've done them at about 36 institutions that have signed on to run the local surveys thus far. Thus far, we focused on the faculty survey. We're currently piloting a student survey as well, and I'll say something about both of them. But to begin with, like to talk about I'd like to talk about some of the impact that the surveys are having at our participants. And we've put together some profiles of 4 of the early participants that have done the survey. I don't know how recognizable all of these institutions will be. Swarthmore is a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. Potsdam is part of the State University of New York, and is a liberal arts college, a small liberal arts college that's part of the State University of New York system. It has about 3,500 students. The University of Texas San Antonio is a large research university and aspires to developing further its public research mission. And DePaul is a private Catholic institution located in Chicago, also a large university. And in all 4 of these cases, let me not draw anything broadly here. Let me talk specifically about some of the interesting impacts that the survey has had. We've seen really clear cases where the use of data about the e-books and e-journals has really helped, for example, at DePaul, has really helped the library leadership to understand how their collections and different kinds of formats are being used, and not just to hear from a couple of faculty members who have strong opinions one way or the other, which previously was how a lot of the information was shared anecdotally. Both Swarthmore and SUNY Potsdam at smaller institutions have been great examples of cases where the survey was really conducted or analyzed in partnership with other parts of the institution. So in the case of SUNY Potsdam, the library and the chief academic officer, the dean of the college, co-sponsored the survey, co-funded the survey, and have really worked together to analyze and share the findings across the campus. And the fact that the faculty survey isn't really strictly about the library has really empowered a partnership that otherwise might not have taken place. And at Swarthmore, they worked very closely with their institutional research office to analyze their findings. And then finally, University of Texas San Antonio was really interesting because they've used the survey as the basis for planning, as one of the bases for planning their new research commons, their new faculty commons that they're setting up in their library. And so some of the service development is being conducted based on the survey findings, actually. Now, I thought I would just give you a quick overview of everyone who thus far has signed up to participate in the project. As those profiles I mentioned a moment ago indicate, certainly a lot of large research universities, but also many small colleges and smaller institutions, teaching-oriented institutions, places like Roger Williams and Providence and Lafayette and even a community college have chosen to participate. So we're really pleased with the diversity in the participants. And then if I did this right, you'll now see, I think I did, you'll now see that in the blue boxes I've highlighted, and the red boxes, I've highlighted 2 different consortia that have participated in the project. The red boxes are the Group of 8, which is a library consortium in Australia, and it's 5 members of that group of large research universities in Australia. And then these, I think it's 8 or 9 institutions in the blue boxes are members of ACERL, which is a grouping of institutions in the southeast part of the United States. And in both cases, the way the project has worked is that the members of these consortia have developed a questionnaire, because we have a lot of options for how to customize the faculty survey questionnaire out of these building blocks made up of thematic modules. And so you can take a module about, for example, about discovery of information, and a building block about access to scholarly literature, and a building block about the print to electronic format transition. You can take all of these different building blocks about teaching or student research skills and so forth, to kind of customize your own questionnaire. And so these groupings of in the blue boxes and the green box and the red boxes have developed a questionnaire that has most of it in common with one another. So let's say 4/5 of it in common, so that they can look together at what they are at questions together. But then they've had a smaller set of the questionnaire that is customized for their own institution, so that different institutions can cover topics that matter to them locally. One of the things that one of the ways that we're working to add value to the consortia beyond what they would experience by running the project locally is to do some aggregate analysis of what the group of universities is learning, what the group of colleges is learning, and so we'll be writing a large-scale report for the Group of 8. That was something that they asked us to do. That will analyze collectively how the members how the members' faculty feel about a variety of different questions, and we expect that will be very useful to them. We're in the middle of doing this now. We expect that will be useful to them in helping them determine avenues for further collaboration inside that consortium. So looking at where do faculty members align across those 5 institutions on shared needs should, we hope, we believe, really help the consortium to figure out how to develop new services to help its members collaborate where there's the most commonality in faculty member needs. We'll be doing something a little bit different than that for those Southeast institutions in the United States. We'll be doing a presentation. I expect we'll be doing a presentation at an upcoming meeting of that group that really covers what how they look like in the aggregate. So trying to understand, trying to project up from 8 or so of their members up to the 40 or so to understand how what the needs collectively of these institutions in the Southeast will be. One of the things that's so powerful about these comparisons is that they're not how can I say it? They're not there's no kind of good or bad here. Because of the nature of the survey, it's not all about who's better, who's worse. It's really a question about how are your faculty members feeling, what are their practices, what are their attitudes, and with the idea of being able to help serve them most effectively. So that can happen at the level of a single institution. How can that single institution serve faculty members most effectively? But also at the level of a group, how can the group develop services that serve faculty members most effectively? So I think this is perhaps a good moment to just say a few more words about how we might leverage both the user studies that have already been conducted to date, and perhaps that you'll take further steps on in the future, and how those might connect to the surveys in some tangible ways. So within one institution, there are real opportunities using a survey like this one to establish baselines, to describe current practices, and to identify trends. And I think that words like baseline and current and trends are really, really important in thinking about a survey, because one of the great things about a survey like this one is that it can be conducted on some regular basis. So with our national surveys, we've been conducting them every 3 years. That may not be the right timeline for individual institutions or groups of them, but if you were to choose to do, one now or in the next few years and one in 3 or 5 or 7 years from now, you would be able to see trend lines and how faculty members are able to, how their attitudes and practices are changing over time. And those trend lines are even more powerful than data about a single point in time, because they show you directionality. And in some cases, they can have predictive value about where faculty members' attitudes and practices are likely to go next. So, so conducting a survey twice is more than twice as valuable as conducting it once. Certainly, both the surveys as well as the user studies are really designed to select areas for library improvement. But also I think the surveys have a special opportunity to help you think about collaborative projects if you look at some of the same areas of interest, some of the same modular building blocks from institution to institution. Certainly opportunities to develop new concepts, totally new ideas for technologies and services and spaces. We believe that by driving the surveys and the user studies from the perspective of what do faculty members, or in the case of students, what are students doing, you can actually design and build new services and new spaces and new technologies in a way that in a way that is really innovative and offers real opportunities for the library to innovate in going forward. Certainly, there are opportunities to think about library staff development, both in terms of the findings of the project and some of the ways that we're able to help you situate the findings, but also because, as with the user studies, these require a local partnership and a really strong, institutional commitment to the project. There's a real opportunity for library staff to learn about survey research and survey administration, and to increase the research capacity of your own libraries and the group of libraries. So that's something that we've our survey coordinator here is a PhD whose focus is survey research, and is someone who is really well works directly with the institutions that participate to help them do so in the most effective way and walk them through really what survey research is all about, where that kind of basic introduction can be useful. And within one institution, I've already mentioned, and Nancy has as well, opportunities to build relationships with faculty members, with other parts of the campus administration, and we've really seen some very strong collaborations with campus IT, with the chief academic officer, with with deans of different parts of the different parts of the college, and indeed with faculty members in sharing the findings, because many of our participants have in one way or another chose to share the findings back to the faculty members. So not just actively listen to them, but also share the findings back with them, which can be quite valuable. And certainly across a group of institutions, there's a real opportunity to support faculty collaborations and library collaborations as well. So I think that brings me to the end of my remarks. I'll just thank you for your interest, and Nancy and I are both very happy at this point to talk to you a little bit about possible next steps, or answer any questions that any part of the presentation may have raised. Perhaps I'm going to go back into the chat, which I haven't been looking at for a few minutes, and see if there are questions there that I should look to answer at this point.
Thank you, Roger. It seems, yeah, the chat has many questions, more internal, I would say, in the sense that many of us are sort of involved with assessing the value of the library and its services, and we want to do something here to cover, but I don't know if there are specific questions that Roger or Nancy can respond to.
I guess one thing that I might just mention, if there's a moment while people are collecting their thoughts, is that I think Nancy and I and Ithaka S+R generally really see all of the work we've talked about over the last 45 minutes or so as being part of an effort to help libraries and their parent universities and colleges become more and more data-driven or evidence-based in their decision making. And you know, sometimes this is expressed as being about assessment, and so we've worked very hard, Nancy and I and our respective projects, to integrate our work into the assessment community of academic libraries. I think we've also tried to go beyond in both of our work. I think is really distinguished in going well beyond assessing existing services and spaces and capabilities into really helping the library be evidence-based in determining its future, or playing a role in being evidence-based in determining its future. And from my perspective, that's part of what's just so exciting about all of these areas here. So let me mute my microphone now, and we can take some questions.
Roger, I wanted to give other people time to ask questions, but while others are thinking of what they want to ask, I had some kind of general level questions. This is either for or both for Roger and Nancy. There was one of the things that I saw come out of your recently published the survey of library directors was this discrepancy between the views of or perceived views of campus administration and the library directors in terms of some of the priorities or roles of libraries. And one of those discrepancies was the importance of the library's role in dealing with local scholarly production, preservation, and archiving issues. And I was thrilled on the one hand to see that there was pretty strong concurrence or perceived concurrence between the priority of information literacy and instruction, but on the other hand, this discrepancy between the library directors and what they perceived of their campus administrators in terms of the preservation and archiving, dealing with local scholarly materials, that role, which seemed to be relatively low. And I'm wondering is there something that these studies, either the user studies or the surveys, might be able to address in terms of helping to either close that gap or address it in some way? This is kind of a general question. Maybe it's not concrete enough, but do you have anything that you could say to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. One of the things that we have really emphasized in the library survey is trying to understand the sort of vision and leadership dynamics that library directors experience. And when I say leadership dynamics, as you pointed out, we've been really looking at levels of alignment between how the library director herself or himself feels and the way that they perceive their direct supervisor, whether that's the provost or someone else, how they imagine that person feels on a variety of issues. Although they always perceive their direct supervisors to feel that library functions are a little bit less, a fewer share of them think that those library functions are as valuable as the directors themselves feel. The differences are relatively modest, with the exception of the preservation and archiving role of the library, where there's a feeling that there's a bigger disconnect. And I think that, but I think that in all cases there is a disconnect, at least a slight disconnect. And so, one of the reasons, I think you're exactly right to point this out. One of the reasons to take on the kinds of work that we're talking about is to have a common, a common data set that can not only be useful inside the library, but also useful to the library leader in articulating to one's supervisor, to the faculty members on campus, and elsewhere as needed, why various steps and directions are being pursued. So very frequently the library community says, well, we're doing this because other libraries are doing this, whatever this is, and that's good too. But being able to say, we're doing this because this is what faculty members want, or this is what students want, or this is what they need. I think this is a really a valuable opportunity. Another related finding from the library survey that I'll mention is that we've been concerned to see that the majority of library directors, both in 2010 and again in 2013 in the US, do not agree strongly that they have a well-developed plan, well-developed strategy for addressing changing user needs and research practices. And as I think we all know, user needs and research practices are in steady transformation. And one of the things that we found was that those library directors that are pursuing a variety of different types of assessment methods, and it needn't be surveys or user studies, but those certainly are two of the ones that we asked about. But those libraries that are pursuing various kinds of data gathering and data analysis, those libraries are much more likely statistically to feel that, for their directors to feel that they do have a well-developed plan for meeting changing user needs and practices, and that's I think a really significant finding. There are some plans. I'd love to say that there are some plans to address these questions with campus leaders. I'd love to do that survey. At this point, we don't have any concrete plans to do that, but it's definitely something that we'd like to consider if there's a way to move in that direction as well.
Thank you, Roger. I'm really interested in knowing from actually the audience what are the best steps would be to go forward with you, because I see from the chat that there is an interest. We don't exactly focus on what we should investigate. Is it user need, faculty practices, something else, information literacy? It would be very interesting to know how to get this kind of feedback from all the AMICAL participants. Maybe there won't be time for many to say something, but please express yourself if you can have ideas in mind.
Can I ask for a clarification too? This is mainly direct, I guess, to Nancy. Nancy, you had put up a slide where I think you were looking at the a sort of workflow whereby you were proposing that we would be using the user studies to feed ideas that we might incorporate into broader studies, and then for there to be a sort of feedback loop going around in a cycle. Is that what did I understand that right? Is that what you're suggesting that we use as a general plan, that you think that would be the most effective way to move forward with this, is to first look at these focused user studies and then use the conclusions from that to or hypotheses to build out our the broader surveys?
I think that's one way to go, and I think there are probably a few different ways you could do this, and I don't know exactly what is best, but let me put out an idea that if you wanted to move forward with the faculty survey, I think that one of the pieces of information that you could use in deciding how to do it and what to focus on would be to look back at that piece of work we did last year and see if there are things that come out of that that help guide the selection of the questions or the modules for the survey. I don't know if I would say that that should be the sole determining factor, but I think it could be a very, very useful contributing factor. Also, it's not necessary that you go in that direction, but it seems to me that we've done a few pretty interesting user studies now and gotten quite a bit of data, valuable data, and it would be really great now maybe to follow up on some of that. I think there's a good opportunity there.
And I think it might be useful to just jump in to say that on many of the topics that that I understand you've studied together, we do have at least some good coverage already in the questionnaire. One area that we are, Nancy, I hope it's okay to kind of to tell people this, but one area that we are working on together to add to the questionnaire is a module about space usage and space need in and including in the libraries. So so that's a another way in which I think the survey could really help to broaden some of the findings of the user studies, while also recognizing that there's a an advantage to continuing with bringing user studies into some new directions as well.
A couple quick questions related to, I guess, the breadth of participation and how we might participate as a group. One related to something that you brought up, Roger, when we talked about this months back. I guess sort of the minimum numbers to have statistically meaningful data coming out of the surveys. And given that some of our institutions are very small, I remember you expressing some hesitation that for the very small institutions, we might not be able to draw meaningful conclusions out of that. What do you think? What would you say to us in terms of what if we're looking at participating or doing a survey as a group? What are some of the issues that we should be thinking about as we decide who is going to participate? I mean, there's the numbers issue for the response group. There's the cost issue, of course, which we'll just have to talk about over time. Just as background information, that our current Mellon grant doesn't have, just so people are aware, I mentioned this to Roger before, our current Mellon grant doesn't have something planned for, there's no budget planned for helping members to participate in this. This does, I know that normally this is something that that requires financial participation by the participating institutions. And so we'll have to think about that going forward as to how we do that. It's possible that we could try and build in something into our next major grants with the Mellon Foundation if it made sense, if it sounded like something that a large number of AMICAL institutions wanted to participate in. We could try and build that into our next grant. For the moment, for the short term, we don't have consortial money that could be really put towards that. And so we'd have to just sort of, work through some of those details. But is there anything that you want to say in terms of how we build a group, issues as far as who participates and how they participate and that kind of?
Yeah, that's thanks, Jeff. Yes, I think that's probably another difference between user studies and surveys that that bears mentioning. We can't. It doesn't make sense to survey. It doesn't always make sense to run a survey in the case of a very small population. Just simply because it's impossible to do very meaningful analysis with extremely small numbers of respondents. So if one has an institution, a population of faculty members smaller than 100 or 150, it would be difficult to get the kinds of the level of response that would be needed to do very much analysis. Now that does not mean that that we wouldn't there wouldn't be ways to aggregate across institutions. So for example, if 3 or 4 or a dozen, however many smaller institutions wanted to collectively survey their faculty members and try to understand their faculty members, that would be certainly one approach that could be taken. The other thing to say is that with student body size, of course, your student bodies are inevitably much higher than the size of your faculty of your faculties, and so for students, I don't think we've ever come across an institution that has had too few students to survey. So and perhaps there would be one or two in AMICAL that would be too small, but as long as there are several hundred students even, you certainly can run a survey of students. It is the case, of course, that I mean, Nancy, I guess you should step in and correct this if I don't have it quite right, but user studies can be conducted on a much smaller number of users, of course, than surveys can be. I see there's a question about how we selected the institutions and how we ended up with Australia and the US as the current coverage. And a couple of answers to that. First of all, we've started our national level surveys in the U.S. And recently expanded them in 2012 to the U.K. as well. So we've now run national level surveys in the U.S. as well as the U.K. The Australian institutions just happened to be interested. They contacted us. They happened to be interested in the local faculty survey, and we're certainly happy to facilitate any institution worldwide, really, that would like to that would like to participate in the local surveys. We're really happy to do that. So at this point, I expect over time we'll have Canadian participation. Certainly, I expect we'll have further UK projects as well, and would be thrilled if some of the American universities through AMICAL were interested in participating also. I think it's our intention and desire to further internationalize the work here. We are planning, I'm just looking at some of the questions that are popping up. We are planning to do some comparisons between North America and Australia. We already did some comparisons between the UK and the US. And if you're interested, we actually wrote up an issue brief last I can't remember if it was late summer or early fall, about some of the interesting differences and similarities between the U.S. and the U.K. At a national level. And then in terms of the minimum number of students, I don't know that I have a precise answer for you there. We're seeing response rates among our pilot institutions. We're seeing response rates that for the student survey that are in the range of 15 to 25%. So if it was desirable to have at least 100 responses, let's say, it would probably be best to look at minimum student body size of 500 or so. But I'd have to give that a little bit more thought. If there are institutions, in the hundreds, let's say under 1,000, we could talk a little further about what the kind of implications of participating might be. The costs are the survey fees. I'd be happy to share. they range depending on exactly which type of, exactly what, whether you survey faculty members, whether you survey students, whether you survey both. They vary depending on what type of questionnaire you use, how customized it is, versus whether you just use our standard questionnaire. So there are a range of survey fee, price points. They typically start in our sort of standard model. They start at about $3,000 US dollars for an institution to participate, and they go up somewhat from there. But I think we may be talking about a non-typical model with AMICAL. So I don't want you to kind of. I think we should work out, if it's of interest, we should work out exactly what the model might look like, and I think from there we'll easily be able to figure out what that might look like. And Elisabetta, I think your question about the value that the AMICAL answers might have to us at Ithaka is a great one. One of the things that we're constantly trying to do, as I mentioned, is further internationalize the project, and the reason for doing that really is to build up a bigger and bigger base of knowledge about faculty members and now students as well, in terms of understanding at different types of institutions and in different regions and different countries, whether there are similarities or differences. I think that the AMICAL institutions are a particularly fascinating bridge for our projects outside of Anglophone countries, trying to understand how how the surveys work and what they will learn at a group of American-like institutions, but in different types of different regions. And so so I think it absolutely would be something that we'd be really excited about, both in terms of what we would learn, but in terms of what we would learn about the surveys, but also I think in terms of what if you were interested in releasing some of your findings publicly, either institutionally or in the aggregate, I think there would be great interest broadly in understanding US, UK, Canada, Australia, and the American universities as well as the different type of communities. So I think that would be really valuable.
I'm afraid we are running out of time. Jeff?
Yes, we plan to go. I guess we've got another 10 minutes or so if there are other questions. I guess I feel like we haven't gotten a whole lot of feedback from. We've got a few comments here and there from some of the people present here. We don't have the whole consortium, of course, represented in the attendees here today. So it would be nice to gather some, additional feedback from across our membership about what people are interested in doing with this. I think it would be great. I mean, I think this is a fantastic possible initiative for us on several levels. I think both for the institutions themselves, the idea, I think Roger was highlighting the fact that that there was this connection, a correlation, I guess, between data gathering initiatives and strategic planning, and how comfortable library directors feel with their strategic planning, that kind of thing. And that seems to make a lot of sense to me, and this seems to be one exercise that could help our library directors at AMICAL institutions with their strategic planning. And at the same time, at the consortial level, I think this could be one tool, if we did this on an ongoing basis or an occasional basis. This could be a very important tool for AMICAL at the consortial level, helping to identify what kinds of collaborative projects, what kinds of needs we want to focus on as a group, and that could feed into things like our long-term grant planning as well. What do we need to support both financially and through our consortial programs? So I'm really excited about this. I hope we do something with this, but I think we need to gather more specific information about what our institutions want to find out what specific areas they want to study, I guess.
What, Jeff, if we contact the AMICAL representative after this? It seems that there is a general agreement that we can do it. So what if we start studying in a small group the kind of questions that could be posed and prepare a sort of letter to all the AMICAL institutions through the AMICAL representative?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I'm wondering also, just from Roger, for example, how customizable would a survey be that we did with you, for example? I think we talked earlier about the possibility of incorporating part of the library director study, for example, with the faculty and student surveys. What's the model that you envision, and how flexible would that be? How customizable would this be for given our interests?
I think there are a lot of opportunities to customize this for consortium like AMICAL, for a group like AMICAL. I think there are opportunities to as I mentioned, the questionnaires themselves are designed so that you can customize them with your own building, with the building blocks that we've already designed or are in the process of designing, as I mentioned with the space planning one. Space assessment one, but there are also opportunities for you to define other needs. I think we may have talked, Jeff, about a module about the liberal arts, let's say, or topics that might not yet have been built, and we would be really happy to work with you to build really high quality survey questions in a module that could be unique for AMICAL, or alternatively might be something that we just had never thought of before that could be folded back into the larger project and offered to other schools in the U.S. and overseas as well. So those options are certainly ones that we're really happy to work with you on. We've built modules on data management and preservation with a partner library. We've built a module on graduate instruction methods with one of the University of California libraries. We've built a module on online learning with a participant. So we're really comfortable doing that kind of customization for sure. And to your other question, in terms of putting the right, this is a little bit of where I was hesitating about how the fee structure would work. I think that if we're putting together a couple of different things, like the students and faculty, like thinking about something that we might do with librarians or library directors across the consortium, I think there's ways that we could put some or all of those things together that might make sense, but I think we'd have to have a little further conversation about what that exactly might look like. I think it would be fantastic from my perspective to be able to survey either the library directors and or all of the AMICAL librarians, and be able to see how they align with faculty members or with students, or all three of them together. And I think that could be a very, very powerful approach to take in terms of understanding where there's alignment, where there is misalignment that should be addressed in some way, and where there's constructive misalignment that makes sense and is just fine. So yeah. And Elisabetta, to your question about the building blocks, I would be we're not sort of releasing the full questionnaire, in a public space, but I would certainly be happy to share with you the the overview of building blocks, or even the actual survey questions, so you can take a look at what's there right now. Absolutely.
Roger, I'm going to ask a question, and you don't have to answer this right now, but do you think there might be a possibility that we could go through a sort of first iteration of doing a group level survey with you and Ithaka as a sort of pilot, where it would not require the same substantial financial participation on the part of the participating institutions as a first round to see the value that comes out of that, with the idea in mind that we would be preparing, like, for example, as we prepared our coming grant proposals, trying to find funding to help us move forward with that in the future if we thought that that was something that was valuable to both parties. Anyway, you don't have to answer that right now, but it's just an idea that I'm thinking about, because we had talked about the possibility of trying to organize a group, some kind of group participation in the Ithaca survey for fall of this year, as a first round, and that might be an appropriate timeline to work with. And I still would like to do that. And I guess the big hesitation, I guess, is just that I'm wondering whether and how our institutions would be able to find the financing for that participation. But it's something that we can talk about that offline later.
I mean, I'll just say, we've been we're in the process of piloting the student survey. So to take an example, if there was an interest in having one of the AMICAL members serve as a sort of AMICAL pilot institution for the student survey, either it's probably too late to do so this academic year, but perhaps in the fall. I'm sure there would be a way to do that, do something like that in a very reasonable way. There might be other approaches as well, and I'd certainly be happy to have that conversation further.
Okay, great. We can follow up afterwards, I think. I don't know what, Elizabeth, what you think and what others think about in terms of how we move forward with this, but I'm thinking that one model would be to start with the groups that have worked with Nancy in the past, in particular the library directors, as an initial group, and maybe invite others that are interested in participating as a sort of planning committee or coordinating committee that could help to move this project forward. And we could start with that subgroup so that we've got a core of people that are familiar with Nancy's methodologies and that are interested also in complementing this with the survey methodologies that Roger has talked about. But at least start with some kind of a core group and invite others that have a strong interest as well to start sort of talking concretely about what we might want to do with this. Does that make sense, or what do the rest of you think?
But from the chat, as you have seen, it seems that there is an interest in creating an AMICAL Connect group first. Second, invite Roger to participate in AMICAL Connect if he likes the idea. Nancy may be already there. Third, yes, let's try to create a group. And frankly, I would invite for first Samia and the people that are, in this case, that have sort of, I would say probably library directors, because it seems to be, for me, at him, for them to lead the group and to find money for doing this activity. So certainly the old ones can start, but Nigel seems to be very interested as well. Why to exclude new ones?
Nigel says he's retired.
Yeah, Nigel, I thought you were still working.
Okay, well, great. So I'll set up this a group on AMICAL Connect in any case after this webinar. So at least we've got some space where people can go to talk further about this. And in particular, I'll try and target, Elizabeth, you can help me with this. We can try and make sure, if they weren't here today, that the library directors that have been involved in these past studies know about this and are invited to that group as well. And then we can follow up with Nancy and Roger afterwards.
Sandrella, I want to see your plans in the group. Be careful. I think we have to share a lot of information. Not only this is part of a general task that is really difficult for the AMICAL institutions, because they have no comparison most of the time.
Okay, we're just about at the end of our time. Are there other questions or comments that anyone would like to make?
I have a comment. It was very nice being with everybody again today. It was really a pleasure.
And I'll just say thank you so much for your interest in the possibility of being able to work together. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat today.